something happening here. What it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there, telling me I got to beware. It's time to stop. And what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. Alright. Hello, middies. I thought that was the perfect song for the opening. That was one of your guys' Vietnam song projects. Buffalo Springsteen. We need to stop, kind of absorb what's going on in our country. Sure, we're at war in Vietnam, but kind of in a way, we're in a war at home. America was changing during the 60s. This is why I find this decade fascinating. And this is why I spent so much time on it. Because there were so many different social movements going on. Sure, Vietnam was the center of it, but again, you had a lot of things going on during that time that was really tearing apart the fabric of America. You had, the Great Depression, World War II generational people that believed in like law and order and traditional things, and then you had the baby boomers that were just different. They believed in change. They believed in doing things different. They believed in social equality for women and African Americans and Hispanics. So you had those two different groups that in the 60s began to clash and began to divide. So today we're going to be watching a few different video lectures, a few different assignments that will last us for the week. But this video will be on social movements during the 60s. All this should be for most part review, but I want you guys to really understand, how the 60s was really defining time in U.S. history. As you guys saw in the civil rights movement, you had, Malcolm X was a civil rights leader during this time. MLK, with two very different ways of doing things. You had Malcolm X was a civil rights leader. He believed in using violence if need be to advocate change, whereas MLK believed in nonviolence. Malcolm X believed that you need to keep the races segregated and separate, again, different from MLK. And he was assassinated during the 60s. You have the rise of the Black Panther Party, which was a very militant group that was used to defend black communities, set up as defense. You see this picture here of Black Panther throughout like inner city areas and city areas where they believe that police and other hate organizations would go to these cities and cause civil rights violations towards their communities. So this was a paramilitary group that was very militant, or seen as militant towards the white community and towards the types of traditionalists. So you had that going on. You had in Detroit, Chicago, you had race riots during the 60s. Even in Cleveland and Glenville, you had race riots as well. So you had that part of it going on. You had the feminist movement again rising in the 50s and 60s. And that really was started with in 1963 with Betty Friedan. She published this book, The Feminine Mystique. And in the book, it was discovered that where she interviewed housewives, and she discovered in this book that many housewives were not happy with being a housewife, with their role. They wanted more. They wanted more freedom and independence. But many women, especially the old traditional women, they believed that was their place, traditional, where a lot of the baby boom women, the new age women began to kind of, protest that. So this leads to a sexual revolution during the 60s where women began to feel more liberated. They feel like they can have a life and a job outside of the home. So very similar to the flappers in the 20s, they're going to take, kind of some of those moments and ideas and transform them further and carry them out into the 60s. So this group called NOW, the National Organization for Women, formed, where they will fight for women's rights throughout the 60s and bring about lawsuits and bring about change in these areas. Now, their goal is for equal rights for women, equal pay. They wanted to create child care facilities. Now, again, think about that. In the 50s and 60s, it was normal for the women to be the housewife and to stay home and take care of the kids. So women felt trapped. They had no choice but to stay home and take care of the kids because there weren't a whole lot of child care facilities. Child's place was in the home with the mom. So with these new child care facilities, now women can now find jobs outside the home and not be tied down to the home place. They also want to pursue more educational opportunities. and they wanted the same rights that were given to men to give to women as well. Even in jobs and in careers, you had newspaper sections. You had a men's job section and a women's job section. You don't see that today. But small things like that were big things in society at that time. So a couple big court cases. Roe versus Wade in 1970s. This was a Supreme Court case that ruled that it was a woman's choice to decide what they want to do with their body in terms of having a child. So Roe versus Wade made it elite, according to the Supreme Court, that women do have the right to choose an abortion in the first 3 months of pregnancy. Again, very controversial. That's still debated this very day. You also have Title IX to make women more equal in terms of men for funding, in terms of sports and educational opportunities. So this will transform the landscape in terms of how schools operate, because they have to legally provide the same amount of female sports and female opportunities as they do male. So this will lead to more women getting more educational opportunities, more scholarship opportunities, more athletic opportunities in college and in other walks of learning. Then you have the Chicano movement. Now think back to World War II. We talk about the Zoot Suit riots. The Zoot Suit riots, again, were Mexican Americans in California and the western coast that were being discriminated against. They were being segregated out on the west coast, being beat, even by our own military members. So there was a high level of racism in the west coast. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that Mexicans came to California to work on the fruit fields, vegetation fields, the farms that help grow food. And Cesar Chavez, as you guys see here in this picture, there's actually a movie about him just made a couple of years ago that kind of talked about his life story. But he rallied Mexican Americans. He created a union for Mexican farm workers or California farm workers. And this led to the Great Grape Boycott, where he led a boycott of not buying grapes from California. That was very influential and did an excellent job in terms of hitting the pocketbooks of these grape companies that made these farmers change their policies and provide more higher educational benefits, higher monetary benefits, and things of that nature in California. As I said before, many Latinos faced prejudice and discrimination. Many were segregated into the Spanish-speaking neighborhoods. The jobless rate for Latinos was almost 50% higher than whites, where they weren't able to find jobs. They were living in poverty compared to white population. So again, because of the Chicano movement and Cesar Chavez, they're going to demand more equal opportunity and fair treatment in the workplace. As I said, the Great Boycott, led by Cesar Chavez. The United Farm Workers, that was the name of the union. So you kind of read that, but it was successful. After 3 weeks, the union was recognized, and Latino workers got a higher wage and benefits. So very influential. Chavez launched a nationwide boycott of the company's grapes, convinced supermarkets and shoppers not to buy California grapes. So again, very, very, very similar to like the bus boycott with Martin Luther King. A very similar concept. Now you gotta go to Native Americans. So again, all these things in the 60s, guys. Civil rights, Vietnam, the feminist movement, the Indian movement, the Chicano movement. I mean, you had all these things going on at the same time. It's crazy. The American Indian movement, also known as AIM. They fought for Native American rights organizations. Ben Nightenhorse Campbell, he was a Native American leader. He was the first U.S. Senator of Native American origin to be in the Senate that will start advocating for more Native American opportunities. So again, the American Indian movement suffered the highest unemployment rate. And they were frustrated after years of mistreatment by the U.S. government. Now, again, this mistreatment, guys, went back hundreds of years. Think back to what we learned about way back when in terms of Native Americans. There are all these treaties that were being broken by the American government, land being taken with them and put on reservations. So this wasn't just one thing. It was a sequence of things that happened over a long time. So eventually in the 60s, it kind of came to a head. They demanded that Native American lands be restored. They demanded more respect for their culture. that they felt wasn't being given to them. The Trail of Broken Treaties. This is a march led by AIM to D.C. to protest U.S. government's treaty violations throughout history. They marched throughout the country. And then here you see this picture here of Alcatraz. The AIM also will occupy Alcatraz. Now, Alcatraz shut down, I believe, in the 50s. But they will go to the island and they'll occupy the island, which belonged to the U.S. government. This lasted for 19 months and involved about 400 people, where they just occupied the island and refused to leave. You also had environmental concerns as well. Again, all these things going on at one time. This led to this was basically the beat of the drum was led by Rachel Carson. She wrote a book called Silent Spring that warns of us using pesticides, weed killers, bug killers, and just spraying them freely throughout the environment, and not being cautious or careful with where we're dumping these materials. And all these things were entering our food sources, our water sources. So when this book came out, a lot of her data that she was inputting in there, this made a big influence on making the environment clean and safe. So you have Earth Day that was created back in the 70s. You had the EPA that was created in the 70s. So all these things stem from this book. The goals of the movement pretty simple: to clean up the environment. So again, they said Earth Day, Endangered Species Act was created, Clean Water Act, where all these federal legislations were passed because of her work and because of this movement and the hard work of these people. You have the 3 Mile Island incident. This was in 1979. This is where, again, the idea of nuclear energy became big. That nuclear energy was seen as more powerful and can provide more power to more areas, until there was a nuclear reactor accident. Now, 3 Island is in like the Pennsylvania, New Jersey area. This is where the malfunction will happen at this nuclear plant. People feared that radiation might escape the plant. Over 100,000 residents had to be evacuated. So this will really spark the debate about whether or not we should be using nuclear power for energy. Now, this is something that's kind of comes dear to our hearts, because we have a nuclear reactor in Perry, Ohio, near Ashtabula. We have one, I believe, out in Toledo as well. So something to kind of keep in mind, that we have Lake Erie right there as well. That if there ever was something ever happen, an accident to happen, that would cause a lot of harm to our area, to the Great Lakes, etc. Then you have the countercultural movement. Obviously something we'll talk more about today, but counterculture was the baby boom, the 60s, the hippies. This is a movement made up of mostly white, middle class college youths who were disillusioned, who didn't support Vietnam, the injustices of civil rights in the 60s. The hippie movement, it's peace, love, and rock and roll, but they are the ones who are going to reject the mainstream. Like, you have to work 9 to 5 and just sit in your little cubicle and go to work. They didn't believe in that. They wore their hair long. They did drugs. They embraced rock and roll, which was very different from what the old traditionalists believed in. They believed in keeping your hair short, listen to the authority, you fit in, you blend in. Hippie movement was not about that. It was about being free, as free as you can, I guess. So here's Woodstock, 1969, a very famous music festival. Represented, movement, peace, love. People from all across the country would move to California. So San Francisco was like the height, and the countercultural capital of the world in San Francisco. The Haight and Asbury district, very famous. You'll probably see that in the video that I'll play for Ed Puzzle. A very big festival where people just all across the country would congregate there, and they would live in these neighborhoods and just live a free life, move around from place to place, not hold a certain job or a steady job, but just kind of float around. And that's kind of what they believed in. The goal of this movement was to establish a whole new society based upon peace, love, and reject tradition. So you see, all these, different types of fashions and hair statements that was just different. So some of the amendments, the 26th Amendment, so lower the voting age. As I said, the Haight and Ashbury district, so the capital of the hippie district. All right, so we'll move on from there. All right, so anyway, that's this video. Let me know if you have any questions. There'll be several things you can complete during this unit.